Hi, Sam here. Tonight I'm with Sandy Bassey, and we'll be discussing um, the Jewish marriage podcast discussion with Rabbi Manis Friedman. And the title of it is Can Life Alone Be Better? Spoiler alert, I think he comes down hard on the no on that one. So if that's really what you were looking for, you can stop the video now. But yeah, if you think that myself and hopefully more important, Sandy, though, has something interesting to say, then yeah, I guess you can stay with us and find out. So, hi, Sandy.
Hey, Sam.
So before you get started, though, introduce yourself and tell us why you thought it would be a good idea to put yourself on YouTube and what you've been doing with your channel a little bit.
Okay. I don't think anybody's actually started any conversations I've had here saying, tell us a little about yourself. It's usually, why are you here? And all those things.
How did you get here?
Yeah, I know. That's the standard question. One day I want to give some smart answer, give a mode of transportation or something, but we won't do that today. So a little bit about myself. I have spent a lot of years raising two lovely sons, and now working at retail, which lets me hang out with a whole bunch of people that are, also usually in a little bit of shopping crisis. Kids, they're usually just in general crisis or acting like it. For myself, who am I? What do I like? Well, I love art and music, and I write. I've been writing for a while, mostly poetry and some essay length things, and I'm working on seeing if the essays will combine into memoir. So I've been working on a couple of books the last few years, and enough said about that. Until they actually become books, there's no reality there. What else about me? I've met a bunch of interesting people since I got onto the internet in Discord, having chats with people that were interested in Jordan Peterson and stuff. And boy, I usually talk smoothly. I'm just don't ask me about myself. Ask me about other people, about life, about things. Why did I start a YouTube channel? Two reasons. One of the kids where I work has been bugging me to do this for several years. It kind of went like, get on YouTube, do something. We like watching old people do things. Which makes everybody want to have a channel. The other was because, I had decided that where I'm having trouble putting words that are on the page out to publishers or out to magazines or out to other places that are the next step in life if I want to actually be a writer. I found it a lot easier when I was hanging out here just talking to people. So I thought, I'm going to get a channel going, and I'll start talking about some of the things that I do and that interest me, and occasionally some poetry and whatnot, looking at life and things. So I started a YouTube channel, and I called it Once Again with Meaning for several reasons. Partly because I feel like I'm often repeating things, repetition. If you don't get it right the first time, you'll get it right another time. And partly because the first thing I put on it, excuse me, was a story that I talked about my one son who has some language issues. So there was an awful lot of, again and again and again creates meaning.
Yeah.
That's kind of why I did that. And yeah.
Thank you for that. That's it's always fun to hear what really motivates people and what really lights them up and brings them to life. And yeah, I guess I see you for the record when you talk about your boys, and I see the love that you have for them and the passion, and like, well, for example, in the talk that you gave, and it really is very inspiring. And yeah, I just want to thank you for that. So yeah, so today, yeah, I guess what stuck out to you in the video that actually, before I get to that, so there were a few things in the video that I found kind of interesting to begin with. So did you look any more into the place in Minnesota that Rabbi Friedman talks about? The sort of, I guess, like creative community, it sounded like.
No, I didn't. And did you? That's a very interesting sounding place, because he said something about 50 years they've been running this program, and it prompted the
yeah, I did not, and it sort of struck me as interesting. So you said it was for women, and so it sounded like it was gender exclusive, but from what I could gather from the video, it sounded almost like it was completely his idea, which, I mean, in I sense it's maybe a little bit different in Catholic churches, but I guess the idea of a group run for women, that a man, and especially a young man, because it would have been 50 years ago, started that struck me as sort of interesting, and I would have liked to have maybe heard a little bit more about how he came about that, and what his inspiration was. But yeah, maybe that's something to look up later, though. So
I'm just kind of seeing if it'll pop up, because actually he said, because he mentioned it was a Chabad house, and that wouldn't be specifically a place for women. Actually, no. So it surprised me that that they decided, for whatever reason, to invite some of the female students just to vacation there. So let's see. Yeah, by co-founder of Beischana. Interesting. So will this tell me anything? I don't know. No, but it's so I don't, do you know anything about Chabad?
I mean, well, maybe I'm getting this off. If I'm completely wrong, you tell me. But it's like it's a type of fraternal or social organization, right? It's often associated with colleges.
Excuse me. Yeah, well, actually, yeah, there's a Chabad in Guelph near the university, just south of me as well. Yeah, so it's and I'm not going to be able to give you great details on what exactly it all is, but there was shoot, there was a rabbi many years ago, and if you want to follow up on this, Jacob's channel probably has a bunch of talks where he's explaining about Chabad and about the Rebbe. But he was wanting to actually encourage the students to be open to whoever wanted to come in and learn about. I believe their major audience would have been Jewish students. But I think the point was that they weren't necessarily all of the same, like you might have Reformed Judaism, conservative. There's but Chabad itself is an Orthodox expression of Judaism. So, and pretty much you can look up Chabad.org and you can get any of the teachings and stuff that they have. They'll run through like you can do a typical daily Bible reading and weekly Bible reading. They're different portions that they read, and a whole lot of different lessons and things on it. And when I went down in December to there's a local synagogue and the Chabad house in Guelph that has, they do a combined menorah lighting in the town by the town offices there. And I was asking after that about what do they do, because I'd driven past where they have their sort of a storefront location, and basically it's just for running whatever events they do. The location is there because it's looks like it's probably a rental spot. But where he was talking about sounded like they had a more permanent location, a building maybe of their own, because if they were inviting a group of people to come and stay as a portion of their vacation time, so they would have to have somewhere to invite them to come to, you know. So I'm thinking that locations run a little differently than my local one.
Yeah. So he begins a video and he talks about a creation story. And the story he talks about, I guess I'll sound very basic and goyish here. It's not exactly the story of Genesis. In fact, in some ways, it's kind of the opposite, but he does refer to it as being in the Torah. So why don't you give a quick summary of the story and then also help me out here. Where's that story coming from?
Well, it'll be coming from Genesis 1. In the Christian context, we teach Genesis 1 and 2 as sort of the same story from two different perspectives. Whereas in Judaism, they believe that when God initially made man, he made man and woman one entity. And so when you hear Rabbi Friedman talking about shared spine, that they're like the belief from the rabbis goes that before God divided Eve from even Adam and Eve, before he divided them, that they were one entity, and that's what you're hearing in Genesis. And when you look at the oral Torah component of it, they talk about what he was sharing there about there's a number of rabbis who've taught that initially they believed that Adam and Eve were joined back to back. And so while they were one entity and they were a unity, they weren't the same kind of unity that they were going to be when God separated them. And they could now see each other face to face. And that's where he starts that conversation, is that the whole purpose of God creating Adam as this one entity, then separating Adam and Eve into the two components of still the one man he made, that the whole purpose of the separation is for them to, and I wrote it down, it was for them to choose intentionally to become one. So it's not that the oneness was just as they were before they were separated, and that the purpose of the separation itself was to come back together as man and wife, as one entity again. There, as he was talking also about how he framed it in terms of a soulmate, that your other half kind of thing. So eventually, but
yeah. One of the scriptures in Genesis I had thought about was Genesis 5, which is has a kind of genealogy in it, and I'll just read the King James version of it. So Genesis 5:2, male and female created he them and blessed them and called their name Adam. So I think about that, and I guess some of the more modern translations say mankind, which has a plural meaning, but I thought it was interesting. I was thinking about that, how it has the singular meaning there too. And the other thing I thought about was, even though in some ways it's a reverse imagery, is Chesterton's thing, where the human race is a four-legged creature joined at the hip. So, yeah, it's like the idea, which in a very literal sense is true, right? I mean, but yeah, I guess I had some of those images in my mind when I was thinking about that story, and it is a, yeah, I mean, it's a compelling story because it, I guess it sort of opens up and it gives Rabbi Friedman's sort of worldview, which is that male and female are men and women. They're two sides of humanity, and without both sides, the humanity isn't whole. Is I believe the way he would say it. So, and yeah, I guess so. I talked a little bit about what I saw in the video and what stuck out to me initially. What really caught your attention in it?
Honestly, I think, well, it's not the same. I'm not going to quote any other authors or anything. What really grabbed my attention was how well he described some of the dynamics between men and women that I've been trying to explain, like having gone through a marriage and a divorce, and then gone through another relationship where there was death and loss. I've been trying for a couple of years to explain to people the difference in two different kinds of relationship. And one of the reasons why this grabbed me was when I listened to what Rabbi Friedman was saying, is he's describing that very conundrum that I was trying to get at, and he's doing it far better than I have to.
Yeah. So at the end of it, so when you were wrote me a comment about that, I mean, my response was, well, I think vows are important. I mean, I think they're especially important for the community and the family unit beyond the couple, but they're also maybe only as good as the people who make those vows. And then at the end of the video, when I was watching it, Rabbi Friedman says, and I guess I paraphrase, vows are ridiculous, right? So, I mean, it's kind of interesting because he, on one hand, very clearly seems to have a very high view of marriage, but at the same time, he's right in a sense, right? Vows are ridiculous, and but they're also, I mean, they're an ideal or a goal. And yeah, I guess I could go on for a while about how I think it's very interesting that even people who are ostensibly not religious still keep vows in their marriage ceremony. So, and but I guess he talks about marriage, and he talks about it as being something that's in a way almost independent of the two people involved. It's a third thing. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
I'm curious, because I'm not sure I heard him the same way then. So in what way do you see that he was seeing it as not so much about the people, or what was the third?
Well, I mean, that the people, there has to be some baseline commonality, and you need a few things for a marriage to work, but that ultimately, if the marriage is about any one thing, it will fail or it won't work. So in that way, the marriage interacts with, but it's not synonymous with the two people involved in the marriage.
I think, well, I heard him talk about, like, he acknowledged that you might be talking about a couple who are married. You might be talking about a couple who are living together in a common law. You would want both to have the same principles functioning. So it's not that he was saying, like, I don't think he was discrediting vows, and I don't think he was really saying that the marriage wasn't important in any sense. But what he was saying is that you get a marriage out of two people who value each other, who have chosen, like he went through a whole lot of things in the video where he'd talk about the difference between dating and marriage, and how do you get from what are your goals for dating to what are your goals for marriage. And one of the things about 2/3 of the way through that he mentioned that grabbed me was he said, "Do you believe in marriage?"
Yeah.
No, like, if you don't believe in marriage, why are you getting married?
Yeah, that's very Jordan Peterson, right? Like this should be your opening question on a date, right? So
Well, you'd want to know that about the other person for
yeah.
sure, but maybe not your opening question.
I don't think he said opening question, and I don't think he was disparaging vows. I guess as much as he was making the point that there is on some level something very idealistic, or you could say a little ridiculous about the concept of a vow. Because you say, to love and to hold in sickness or in health, right? And I think anyone who's been in not just a marriage, but any kind of relationship for any period of time knows that there's times when you don't feel loving, and there's also times when maybe you love the other person in the relationship, but you don't do a good job of expressing that
So
love.
I've got a couple of questions because two things. What did you hear the interviewer say at the very beginning? One of his opening questions. Did you hear his opening question?
Let's see, I'm trying to think back because I watched some parts and it was this morning. I took some notes, but
yeah. So the interviewer's first question to Rabbi Friedman was, so in the world that we live in today, what value would you say that marriage has for men?
Yeah, so I do remember that, and I was watching it and I was thinking about it. I guess, so it's one of those things you hear about online, but do you think there are a lot of people in your life who question the value of marriage, or maybe question the whole idea of intimacy or relationship with other people? So
when I first arrived in kind of this combined space where everybody's been hanging out across Discord channels and different, watching different talks that each other give, some of the first videos, even from Paul, that I heard, they felt very I don't know. Well, disparaging of the male-female dynamic in the sense that every time that the word feminism came up, it would be very negatively framed. And I was here trying to learn what feminine means, so it's kind of, well, there's a conundrum. I have heard a number of people kind of talk as if it's a pointless hope to have a marriage. And then there's other people who aren't afraid of it. But I think what really grabbed my attention was, I honestly think some of it comes down to what was discussed in this video. And what you really believe about marriage. What do you think about marriage? Do you believe in marriage? And a lot of people don't believe in marriage.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a
Mm.
conscious decision or they've just given up on it.
Yeah. Well, I'll say big picture when you talk about the marriage crisis. I do think that there was something that probably changed in the culture for relatively young people in the 2010s, where the default was to be married, and now the default does seem to be single. So, in that case, I do think that marriage is becoming more difficult. I don't know if the reasons it's becoming difficult, though, are because there's necessarily a lot of people who are saying, oh, I don't want marriage, or I don't want intimacy, or I don't know, too busy working on myself, or I don't see the point of being with other people. I think there's maybe more practical societal reasons behind that to some extent, but also maybe just something of a culture that's making, in some ways, marriage harder.
Well, that's interesting. And do you think the culture is making marriage harder?
I mean, if you look at rates of marriage and how likely someone who is, say, 32 years old is to be married versus how likely they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago, then the answer has to be yes, right? I mean, it's hard to say where all that comes from, but well, I guess let me maybe say this. So I remember in talking to Nate and Shelley Woods, um, and I was thinking about it, and I had, when I lived in Detroit, um, gone to a church regularly, and I didn't meet my spouse through that church. And honestly, for a lot of years, I had very mixed emotions to whether or not I would advise someone who was single to go to a church. But I think what that church probably provided for me is it was one of the very few places in the city where you would see a lot of well, young couples, but also young couples who have children. And I think in that sense, if there's anything you want to change in your life, I think being around people who are accomplishing what you want to accomplish, or who in some way living out the change you want to see, is probably pretty good advice.
It could be, yeah, I suppose. Yeah. I honestly, I don't know if I would still go to a church looking for a mate or to start a family.
Yeah, well, I guess that's my point, that I think there's some complications in that, but I think whether or not you meet a spouse through the church, I think being somewhere where marriage and where family is valued, and I mean, it's something specific even necessarily about the church. It could be, I mean, a synagogue, a mosque, or somewhere even that's a secular space, but where there's families there. I think I mean, I know for myself, I think that was a healthy thing and something that was helpful. And I guess I didn't always view it that way too, which is partially why I think it's an important thing to talk about. Yeah. But maybe we should circle back a little bit to the video. So, yeah, I did have in my notes here, yeah, what does marriage provide? Or it went along with the question. I mean, what is it? And I guess that's interesting because I think Friedman would say maybe that's a bad way to conceive the question, I feel like.
He did answer it, though. So, like, when he was asked, what does marriage offer a man? He said, well, marriage basically offers, well, no, he said he figured that men gained more from marriage than women did, which really surprised me. I'm not sure I was raised with that belief or expectation. Because sometimes the way that he said the same things in a sense, some of the same things at least that I have heard, the man provides for the woman. He did say that. And I'm like, well, yeah, I see that's part of what, is the relationship between the man and woman. But he framed it in the way that that's a necessary part of who a man is that sense of needing to provide for. And that kind of struck me because I did see that in my grandfather's generation. He wouldn't get married until he had a house to bring her home to. Didn't take him that long. He wasn't super old or anything when they got married. But that was the attitude was, you get a house, you get a wife, you get your kids. Yeah. But what Friedman said, and I wrote it down because he was talking about, he started to say some of the words like from the Torah that go and basically switched over to English. And he said, basically the sense is the man is a giver, the woman a receiver. And I have to agree with him that sometimes the culture today is a big part of the problem. If you had said that to me and I'd only had the experience with my ex-husband to lay beside that statement, it would really have rattled me and I would feel a lot less safe with that statement than it does coming after having had my relationship with Jack. That was very true of who Jack was. You'd watch him providing for his kids and his family was so important that he left himself vulnerable to, he was always running, good with math and money, always, double triple checking himself.
Yeah.
My thing is I guess my question becomes, why do some men know that or why are some men actually fed by that ideal and others
but it's important for them to provide. Is that the idea?
Not as a requirement, not the way that, he was joking and talking about the different tasks. He was saying, when you get to dividing up tasks, if neither of you wants to do something, pay somebody to do it for you. Just, it's kind of like, divvy them up. You find something that neither of you likes, then just deal with it, right? So not in that sense of, each person's obligated to certain tasks, because that wasn't what he was getting at. But he was really saying that a man finds his personal value in that sense of his ability to provide. And I've had that conversation with some of the young guys at work and watched sort of their sense of self shift. A couple of them. And it really, this sits in the part of the video where I had some difficulty personally because, and I don't want to jump ahead to some of the things because, but it really intrigued me. That sense of what is the dynamic between man as giver and the woman as a receiver. I've been told my whole life I'm too much of a giver. I give too much. And from his perspective, then that is not within the marriage context. That's not my role. That's not what's going to actually bring me my biggest sense of self and satisfaction in my marriage.
Hmm.
And I did notice ways that was true. Like, Jack was very, no, here, you go out and you get this or that, like I have to pay for that, kind of thing. That kind of is surprising to me, that sense. And one of the things that I kind of wondered with this, because I don't know if this is taking it, I don't think it's not taking it off topic, but when I'm listening to this sense of, this sort of this trust that because the man and the woman were one and they have been pulled into two parts where one is the giver, one is the receiver, the sense is when you put them back together, it's a dynamic, and it's a healthy dynamic. But I've heard it also described very awkwardly, very with great consternation in some church dialogues where they're talking about whether or not there's equality or complementarity in, men and women. And it doesn't even seem to be a thing that is discussed without some form of discomfort.
Well, he does talk about the man as provider, or I guess husband might be the better term, and the wife as a receiver or nourisher. But I guess one of the things I was thinking about as I was watching it is that he used the term emasculated a few times later in the video, but the Jewish perception of manhood, it's not Andrew Tate. It's someone who, it's like sort of like, I guess in some ways, the mid-century model of manhood where it's like Jimmy Stewart or maybe Jack Lemmon in The Apartment, where it's someone who is very attuned to and very providing of the needs of their partner, but also not a showboat or someone who's peacocking or who's trying to make a big deal of themselves, which is it is the opposite of the Instagram culture in some ways.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and I've heard, actually, I think I've heard a bunch of people talking about feeling emasculated as men. I'm pretty sure Paul's had a whole bunch of people talking on that topic in the last year that I've been around here. From various different points of view, or
Yeah. Well, I guess sometimes though, like you hear that, and then the goal is to become, well, maybe not Arnold Schwarzenegger, but at least maybe Mark Wahlberg, right? It's to start pressing weight and to like gain some bulk. And I mean, I say that and it maybe sounds diminishing, but I think physical goals are a very important thing in life in general. And if that brings people purpose and meaning, that's good. But I don't sense that that's what Rabbi Friedman was talking about when he talks about masculinity.
So, curiosity question, because I'm pretty sure he also used the word diminished, but it sounded like you used it differently than he did. So what did you mean in saying it's not, something wasn't diminishing?
Well, I mean, I guess as he perceived diminishing, he No, you are right that
Um,
maybe the way that.
no, I'm looking at my notes. I apologize. You said diminish. He actually said dissolve, which is
Hmm,
interesting.
interesting, yeah. It is a fine distinction. But, well, I guess the sense in which he uses dissolve or emasculate, it does feel very different than the stereotypical manosphere use of those words is where I was going with that. But, and I guess like I don't well hmm, maybe this is a good question. It wasn't in my notes, and maybe we're gonna feel. But what do you think would be Rabbi Friedman's advice to a young man if he came to him and said, I like your talks and I'm struggling in life. I feel like I can't get things together. I don't know, eating more than I should. I'm not working out enough. I'm not real focused on my career. What do you think he would be saying to them?
There was something he said later on about um, somebody that said, like, I'm not ready for marriage because I haven't lived life.
Hmm.
And I think something about that scenario hits that place. I don't know if I'm right that that's kind of where he would lead the discussion is, well, this is like, what do you mean you haven't started living? What do you mean you're not, this is your life,
Hmm.
what is life? I wonder what he would say
Yeah.
to somebody coming and, listing off. He'd probably, I mean, I could just as easily say that about some of the areas of my life to him, not on the same exact framework, but what would he say?
No, it is a good question because he later in the video talks about marriage and he uses the term he says that people who are not bound together are not fully experiencing reality, but at the same time he seems to think that a lot of people are not going into marriage or into relationships with the right mindset, which would imply that there should be something that people should be, if they're single and they don't want to be single, that maybe there are some things they should be doing before they begin looking for a partner.
I'm pretty sure that he's in this video, he's commented on a number of things that I wish had been said to me when I was at the age of looking for, like looking ahead to my adulthood and saying, who am I going to marry? He actually had a few really good lists of things that you should consider when dating. But the ultimate thing that he came down to, and correct me if I've misconstrued the question, because I heard it, but then it just popped into my mind, this portion of the video where he's talking about how, if you're going to go on a date, you're not sitting there thinking, I'm looking for the most beautiful or the most handsome or the most whatever, because that throws everything out of balance. It's, do I like this person? Am I comfortable around this person? Am I attracted to this person? This did come after he talked about, some of the excuses of I'm not ready because, which goes down to what I said about life. But I think ideally he'd want us, sort of say, are you, like, if you're not ready for life, if you're not living life, you're not ready for anything else either.
Yeah.
It, marriage for me, I tend to, like, if you ask me, I'd be one of those people that say, yes, I absolutely believe in marriage. I believe in it intensely, and I think it's good for people to be married. And I know that there are some people I know who have been single their whole lives and they're content. they're happy with it. So not saying you can't have that outcome in life, but ideally, I think he thinks that, I think ideally, I think he'd say, look after don't spend so much focus on yourself that you're balancing everything off of how am I doing. Don't spend so much time looking for perfection in the other person. Like, you don't marry a person because, it would be wrong for me to say, oh, I really need to be married, so therefore I will just pick somebody. Because you have to, I know that that's important. It's something that Jack asked me when we were first together is, it's the whole, why are you with me? Is it because I showed you some attention? Is it because I make you feel, wanted? Is it because, he says, like, what is it, what is it about me? Because he didn't think he was, and a lot of us are guilty of this. We always downplay ourselves. We think, oh, well, here's my 5 billion flaws, and how could, so-and-so possibly like me, or this or that. And I remember thinking that jumped out at me when Rabbi Friedman mentioned it again, that is that you really want to be with somebody that you can be best friends with. You want to be with somebody that is going to be a friend for life.
Yeah.
And other than that, you want to be, you want to like them, you want to be comfortable with them, and you want to be attracted to them.
Yeah.
Everything else you build.
Yeah, well, I think there's this idea in almost any marriage advice or dating advice kind of discussion, which I think is a good idea, which is that you should be taking the idea of marriage seriously. And I remember when I was single, I used online dating, and I would go on, and yes, I do mean websites too, not apps, because I think this was more common on websites, where you would see dating profiles, and I oftentimes would be an Indian or a Asian, likely Korean woman, who would say something like, I'm looking to, or I've got my life in order, things are going well, and I'm looking to get married. And part of me would see that, and I would think, that's not the way we do things really most of the time. But the more I thought about it, it's like, I think that in general, young people get a lot of career advice, and they're very disciplined and very seriously thinking about work and how to provide for themselves and those things. But there's this idea that marriage will just come together. And that's not something you have to think about or put too much effort into. So I think just the whole idea even of any marriage advice or discussion about it is sort of presupposing that it's not something that's automatic. It's something that people should take seriously. And I think those are good starting points. Whether that's everything or not, I think there's obviously more to it than that, and there's maybe things that seem non-intuitive, or we wouldn't be discussing this, and there wouldn't be, I don't know, who knows how many millions of YouTube videos about these things. But and for some reason we think that we need more, because I guess we're the ones, right? We're going to solve the marriage crisis, right? No, I'm joking, but okay. So I did have a few more questions I wanted to get to, though, that got brought up in the discussion, or at least that I thought about in parallel with the discussion in the podcast. And the first one I had, one of the ones I had is it weak or bad to say I want to get married, because I need someone or I feel lonely?
I think that would be something he would say is not a good reason. I was thinking about the fact that he had talked about you don't marry for love, because if you marry for love, it's probably because you want to be loved, and therefore you're balancing it off the expectation that somebody's going to love you. And that's where he started talking about friendship, I think, and the fact that you want to be, it's not that he's saying you're not going to get love out of marriage, but he's saying that shouldn't be your reason for going into it. You should really want to, you should like the person, you should be comfortable, and attracted. And, and he was saying intimacy grows from those places. Like,
Yeah.
I looked at the different books that he wrote, and I thought, well, those are books I would read.
Yeah.
But so does that get at the question?
No, it is. I guess I've been thinking about this recently, and I think the common perception is that marrying not to be alone is not what someone should do. And I understand the point that you shouldn't get married or seek a relationship because you feel like you're deficient. And I think Rabbi Friedman does an excellent job of putting that out. But at the same time, there's a part of me where, I think of in my work, and I see it a bit with people I know, where it's easy to say, oh, you shouldn't look for another person, not to be alone if you're in your 30s or your 40s and you're healthy and things are going pretty well in your life. But I do see a decent number of older people who don't have a partner or they don't have other people in their life. And it is something that can be a real challenge. I could go into more detailed specifics as it relates to people I've interacted with recently and money and those kinds of things. I don't think that would be fruitful for anyone, but I do kind of think that there is more to the idea of having people in your life in general as you get older, or even really when things aren't going exactly according to plan. Because I think of, like, I had a fall and I had a pretty serious concussion. I actually had to have plastic surgery after that. I've had a nose job, so fun fact about me. But anyways, after the fall, though, I slapped the pavement. It's almost like a Looney Tunes cartoon, and I'm going home, and my wife, she works overnights, and I don't know what I would have done if she wasn't there. So, I think there is something to be said for having someone in your life, even if it's not always exactly perfect and you have struggles. I think just the idea of having some other people and having some community, I think, is a helpful thing in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Being alone is not a good thing. And I know who was talking about it recently. Somebody was talking recently too, even about people that just want to share living space with somebody because you don't really want to live alone. It's not natural to live alone.
Yeah. So did you, let's feeds into the next question I had, which is, did you find his distinction between being lonely and being alone useful?
I was just trying to look for that. So if you've got it, because he was talking about people who say, leave me alone. And
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't make good notes there. What's wrong with being alone?
No, well, that's what he was saying, is that being alone and being lonely are not synonymous. No. And that um, and that you shouldn't seek other people because you feel lonely. But I guess, and I don't know, I know, gosh, maybe having some Reform background, this was dinging thoughts of the Trinity in my head. But he said that yeah, even God didn't want to be alone, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's one of the things he talks about. But he talks about it in relationship to Adam, obviously,
yeah.
whereas yeah, Reformed Christians would talk about it in relationship to the Trinity. Yeah.
Although if although that would qualify, like it from a Reformed perspective, if you're going to say that God is Trinity, then he's technically already not alone. But the interesting point is he also had the angels, and it's like Adam with the animals. The relationship between God and the angels wasn't the relationship that God had with man. And there's something specific to his relationship with man that's more fulfilling. It's more vital. It's got more life to it, and it's about life. All of this is about life. So what did you say?
Yeah. So no, there's something to that. I mean, the idea of yeah, an embodiment, and the fact that that there was something that God needed and that God finds in the physical world. So then
It's cool, actually,
yeah.
what he does.
So, and then I guess another point that he had that kind of made me chuckle a little bit is he was asked who should be the ideal person to get married, and Rabbi Friedman had said, "Well, ideally you should be perfect," but yeah, so
Yep.
it's like no, I definitely I talk about Christian parallels, and I definitely heard in my head. Who then shall marry, right? So,
As long as you don't throw your hands up, in frustration and say it's hopeless.
oh gosh, yeah. So, but I mean, I do think a sense of humor, though, for any relationship. And yeah, I mean, I guess we talk about these things in terms of male-female dynamics and um, romance, but it's also, yeah, I think a sense of humor in almost any relationship is helpful, though.
I think that a sense of humor is vital. I have to say I really love Jack's sense of humor.
Hmm.
Oh yes, he could be very irritating. That whole could almost be British. Where you've got all that irony going and a little bit of sarcasm woven in there. And
Should I say British or Dutch?
could be. Well, yes, I do know some Dutch people that have some humor. My ex did not have a good sense of humor, and I missed that. In our interactions, like very intelligent. You ask him to talk about the institutes or any of the fact things. Yeah. Family wise, humor was he missed that somewhere along the line. He was the youngest kid. I guess he just didn't get the same opportunity to have those interactions with siblings. They were all adults.
Yeah. So, and then another question I had with the video, and maybe this will kind of lead us into a bit of a conclusion here, but so in the end of it, he talks about marriage, Rabbi Friedman, and he's talking about it, and he uses the term reality. So the idea that if you're, excuse me, not married, or in some ways you're not maybe living up to your full potential. And I'm thinking about this, and maybe, and I'd like your feedback on this, because I guess I feel like maybe like if you look at sort of the Christian spectrum and then in relationship to Judaism, um, I feel like Catholics, Protestants, and Jews would all have very different answers to the question, is someone not living up to their purpose if they're not married? And maybe I'm off here and I would stand to be corrected, but I think the Jewish perspective does seem to be, yes, a little bit more strongly than the Christian perspective, and the Protestant perspective is somewhere between the two, and the Catholic or Orthodox perspective is no, you don't need to be married to be a full person.
That's interesting. I didn't, I'll admit, I didn't hear the word reality at the end, but in terms of full potential or whatever, I would think, yeah, absolutely, that the Jewish perspective would be that you're not living up to your full potential, because there's such this sense of participating in creation with God, that that they, part of their belief structure is that you are to provide children into the world, and so not that you can't provide children without being married, but at the same time, the ideal, that is the ideal, is the husband and the wife will have children. The more the better in some respects, but at least I remember hearing at least two, and then you're replenishing. It's the whole Adam and Eve are divided into the two come together, they reproduce, they have children, and the children reproduce, and even the animals, it's that whole image of, you picture the whole Noah's Ark thing, except for the ones that were sent in for sacrifice, which went in groups of 7. The other ones all just went in 2 by 2. This is how you repopulate the earth. This is how you continue creation. This is how you live out the commands of God to go out and, out into the world. There's that sense that he left that to man to continue with him, to in various ways be creative and continue the work of the creation. Christian contexts. Yeah, I'm not sure about your take on Catholics and Orthodox. As far as I knew, Catholics were very big on marriage and having children.
Well, yes, but but there's also the idea of holy orders and Catholicism, and I mean, there is the idea that in some ways people who are married aren't. They're in some ways that we're not the people who could quite cut it, right? I mean, the people who are in the priesthood or who are nuns, in some ways they're living the truest calling.
Yeah, I think there was earlier today on one of the discords that I saw some discussion on Christian versus Jewish take on chosenness. And I think when you look at what you're just describing with, like the holy orders, in the church in different forms, there is this real strong sense of the position of the priest, the minister, a nun, or that they've been designated to a specific role more directly with God. Of course, in Protestant churches, that doesn't negate the possibility of a marriage, whereas in some of the other ones it would. So, yeah, that may impact how you see your ability to fulfill God's calling.
Okay, and then I guess we'll wrap up the video maybe similarly to how the the video we're commenting on wrapped up. So I guess we've talked about this stuff on a very high level, conceptual way. But I guess if you're someone who is watching this video and you're thinking, okay, I would like to have a partner, I would like to be in a marriage, but I'm not currently, and maybe I don't see a lot of prospects for that. I guess, is there any practical advice you would give someone in that situation?
You have to be open.
Yeah.
If you're not open to it, then any interactions that you have with other people are going to convey that message one way or another. But I think you also have to be honest. Like, I don't know if guys go through this, but as a girl, it's that whole pressure thing. I remember even in my teens, there was this. We went to a event at a different church than we went to, my girlfriends and I. And there was this guy there that was absolutely adamant that he was, going to leave the place with a date. And it was like, excuse me?
He was not doing a good job of being alone.
No. He was also strongly making a point that he felt he was deserving of a date. And I think he was, I honestly don't remember all of his looks. He was certainly not ugly by any means. He was a little bit shorter than average, but I mean, heck, my dad was 5'4", but I would not have gone out with him because his entire demeanor was very off-putting. And I think that was one of the things that Rabbi Friedman said is, if there's anything that makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do think the idea of, I don't know, maybe not settling, but I've heard a few other people put it as, if the person isn't giving you an obvious reason not to continue to date them or be with them, then that you should maybe be open to at least getting to know them more and being more comfortable with them, as opposed to this feeling that you see in like a lot of reality shows where you're looking to just see the one, and then you'll be in love with them forever, and just like your passion will hold you through everything, I guess.
No, it's pretty much, being good enough friends that you can laugh at your mistakes, working through stuff, just it's funny, it's in the course of my time with Jack, but one of the things that I've come away thinking about was, at one point he said, "We've been together 5 years and you've only told me off twice. And both times I deserved it." And I was going, I must have said something was irritating much more often than that. No clue what two things I would have said out of all the time and conversations we had.
I guess.
Okay.
Goldie told me off 2 times. Yeah, that is weirdly specific.
My mind's starting to do the checklist of, that can't be right.
No, I told you off at least 6 times, you see? All right. Well, thank you for coming on tonight. And I'll probably post this maybe on like Sunday. So if you want to take a look at it first, feel free to go ahead. So, all right. Thanks, Sandy.
Probably better not to look. Just trust and go with it.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Good job.